that chair in the way of the, okay. All right, I'm Colin Ward. I'm a front-end developer for IdeaDen. We work over in Berry Hill, and we do a lot of sites for musicians mainly. Some of our clients are Van Perry, Brad Paisley, The Doors. For whatever reason, we do a lot of classic rock, and we do a lot of country. I don't know why it's just those two genres, but those are the people that we have. Before we start on this, how many people in here are front-end developers, do responsive work, just out of curiosity? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I knew who I was talking to. I'm a front-end developer. I'm not a designer. I know there's some people who can do full stack. They can do design. They can do development. And more power to you. I focus mainly on development. I didn't go to art school or anything like that. If you can do both, I respect you. But what I know best is the development side of things. I've been doing responsive work for about 2 years, and what I was going to talk about was mainly things I wish I knew when I started. Responsive isn't all that old, but it's changing basically with every new iPhone, every Android. There's something different that you need to know. So we're just going to go through some best practices to minimize the pain, because eventually you'll run into a bug, and it happens. So what is wrong with mobile sites? This is what responsive sites are fixing. A mobile site is, if you go to like NewYorkTimes.com, m.NewYorkTimes.com. The first thing is it's hard to maintain because it's two completely different sites most of the time, especially if you're working with a CMS, which most bigger sites are. You've got your mobile site that you have to do all the development for, do your jQuery on, put your content in, and then you have your desktop site people are looking at, and you're doing one site, but you're really doing all of your work twice. So when you post an article on your site, does it work on the desktop? Does it work on mobile? You're introducing double the amount of roadblocks that you could run into that could create a problem. So if you go responsive, you don't have that problem, which is a big plus. The other thing is Google is now actually penalizing sites for doing a separate mobile site. If I'm on my phone and I go to a desktop site and it redirects me to the mobile homepage, Google actually is not going to dock you in your search rankings. So if they're definitely trying to push people in the right direction towards responsiveness. The other thing is sometimes it's just a bad user experience. Like if I post this article, which I saw the other day, one of my friends posted this about the FCC, net neutrality. They put it on their Facebook via their phone. I was looking at it on my desktop. It sends me right to the mobile New York Times site. So this is terrible on my desktop. I have this little tiny row here that, it's perfect for a phone, but crappy on a desktop. And, this is not a good user experience. And most people, you don't want to spend extra time trying to decide, okay, are they on mobile or are they on desktop? Because technically you could write into your mobile site, if this person is on desktop, send them back to desktop. But again, you're introducing more work. And responsive is a way to fix those three problems. It's one code base, one page, and it works on your phone, your tablet, small monitors, up to big Apple cinema-sized monitors if you do it right. So as a front-end developer, this is awesome because I'm only looking at one set of templates if you're working in a CMS, one set of code, and that's way better than a responsive site. I personally love responsive. It saves me a lot of time, especially if we're maintaining a site. Building it out takes a little bit longer, but I'm a big fan of responsive. So here's why you shouldn't use it. There's a lot of things you need to know before you decide to go down the responsive road. It's cool, but there's some caveats to it. The first is it will take you longer when you build out a site for the first time. Building a mobile site and building a desktop site, from opening a new document, writing that first HTML tag, to completion, it's longer building a responsive site. There's more QA that you have to go through with a responsive site, and there's just more of a build-up to get it there. So if the client cares about getting it live quickly, that's something to keep in mind. Another thing is, do you need it? Before you start a responsive site, generally you're probably replacing an existing site more often than not. I'd say check your analytics. Like if I'm building, AARP site and it's 95% people using Windows XP, I don't want to go down the responsive road. But for, say Brad Paisley, where we're more mobile than we are desktop sites, you know, that's definitely a reason to go responsive. But before you go down the responsive road, before you invest all the time in building an awesome responsive site, make sure there's actually a purpose for it. Team unity is a big thing for me, and this is something I've just learned from doing responsive sites over the last 2 years. If you're going to go down the responsive road, the designer or design team needs to be on board with going responsive. Your developer or developers need to be okay with going responsive. Your project manager needs to be on board with responsive, and the client needs to at least understand what you're doing. There's more work in the build-out process, and if somebody doesn't really buy into the reason why you're going down through these extra steps to build out a responsive site, it can create a lot of headaches. I had a project that I was working on when we had a designer and a project manager that didn't really want to go responsive, and it just made things more difficult because they're like, why are we putting in all this extra effort? So if you're going to go and build a responsive site, make sure everybody's on board. So,
when you say it takes off your time, is that where you're spending more of your time in coordinating with the other factors, or is it in the development process that it's taking more time?
it depends on the project. Obviously, depending on who your client is, you have to explain to them, you know, it will look one way on your phone, it'll look another way on your desktop, and there's some things you get really down to the nitty-gritty that responsive can't do that the mobile site could do. But most of the time, from a development perspective, it takes longer to write out the code. The trade-off is when it gets into maintenance mode. If you're still the one maintaining the site, or if you hand it off to the client, it's much easier when you get to that point for a responsive site versus having a mobile site and a desktop site. A lot of the testing takes a lot longer because for a desktop site, you know, especially if you're going to pixels, it's like, okay, it's going to be 1,000 pixels wide on the container, and you can hard test that. You can go down Safari, Firefox, IE, and cross-browser test in, 15 minutes. But responsive sites, it could be an infinite number of possibilities, and, you'll find things and then go back and fix them. So that's the main thing, at least in my experience. Yeah.
So it takes longer to develop a responsive site versus, let's say, a desktop site.
Right.
But let's say I'm doing a desktop and a mobile site. Mm-hmm. If I do those two individually, would you still say that responsive beats those, or is it still going to go over?
It depends on how elaborate your content is. If it's, a really basic site, responsive is going to be quicker. If you're building like a really robust mobile site and a really robust desktop site, I'd probably still say go towards responsive, because if your development time is roughly the same, it's probably better to go the responsive way. Honestly, it's one of those things, like when you look at the content, you look at the design, because I'm not a designer, I'm always the one looking at the design, you can kind of tell. It definitely helps if you have a design team that has done a responsive site before. If you're a rookie going into it, it's one of those things, like if you can't really learn responsive by reading a book. You just actually have to open up your browser or open up your IDE or whatever and code it out and figure things out that way. Break it and then fix it, kind of learning. 2-minute crash course. The basics of coding out a responsive site is pretty simple. If you understand CSS, you're 95% of the way there to doing a responsive site. It's not all that complicated to write out media queries, which is what you use for responsive sites. Before I go down that road, though, responsive, it's only been mainstream probably 2 years. I'm sure like Smashing Magazine's been doing it a little bit longer. But, there's not a lot of books out for it yet. There's no real awesome authorities out for it. There's some people who I think are better than others. But we're all still, as a web development community, figuring out best practices. And I really don't like when I go on to forums and try to find stuff, look up a question. People are like, oh, my responsive way is awesome, and this other coded way out, this other guy who coded something out, he sucks. He's a terrible developer. And I don't know what it is about, at least from what I've seen about responsive development, but there's a lot of criticism that I've seen on Twitter and, forums and stuff, and I don't understand why that is. So something I would say, if you want to go down responsive, just be humble about it. Like, it's a new technology. There's no reason to crap on somebody else because you don't know what their background is, you don't know what their time frame is. And responsive development is definitely one of those things where if you have more time, you can make your code a lot better. So one little preachy thing I wanted to say is, if you get into this, for whatever reason, there's responsive haters out there. So beware of that, and have a thick skin if you have a higher profile site, because people have broken down my code and I'm like, dude, who cares? We cross-browser tested it, it works fine. So anyway, this is some basic CSS. We have an H1 declared color blue, a media query which is specifying if you're on a mobile phone, the color is red. That's responsive. That's basically all you're doing is you declare something in CSS, and then you override that cascading, like a cascading style sheet, and then say the color is red. So if I'm on my desktop, I see the H1 is blue. If I'm on my mobile phone, I see the color is red. That's not that complicated, and that's really the complete core of how you code out a responsive site. It's really just like adding a class and overriding it. Like if I had H1 and then the class, red, and that's it. Okay, obviously it's not that simple though as you go and build out like a big site. So 3 things that I think make it a lot easier. The first is to use Sass, less any kind of CSS preprocessor. If you're using Drupal or WordPress, that can help too. But you're going to be writing your CSS because you're coding a mobile site and a desktop site and Apple Cinema displays. There's going to be more code. Like it wouldn't surprise me for bigger responsive sites. The Weather Underground just launched a new responsive site. I think from what I could tell, it's over 10,000 lines of CSS, probably minified down, but you're going to have a big bloated out CSS document if you're not careful. And using Sass or less or some kind of preprocessor definitely will help. It'll help keep you organized, and also you can minify it at the end. So definitely, if you're going to go and build a bigger responsive site, I'd say use a preprocessor. It'll save you time, and it'll also load your pages quicker. Mobile first. This is something that's sort of a catchphrase in responsive design or development. And the concept basically is when you're building out a site, from the design phase and then also in the development phase, is to start with your mobile phone. If you're a designer, design whatever the site's going to look like for the mobile phone. Figure out whatever content you want to be in there. And then take that design and all the content that's in your design and then design the desktop from there. Same thing with development. Write out your CSS, write out your HTML, write out your JavaScript, code it out for your mobile phone, and then from there, build out your desktop. Basically, the concept is it's much easier to build up than it is to tear down because you're overriding styles as you go. And then the other thing is content. This screen is significantly smaller than an Apple Cinema display, but if you're going and building a responsive site, you need to fit everything onto all those devices. So if you're trying to fit everything onto a mobile phone and you're thinking mobile first, it'll make you take another look at, do we really need 9 different sets of Facebook and Twitter share buttons? Okay, maybe we only need 1. Is this sidebar necessary? Basically, it makes you look at your content and prioritize what's most important. So that's definitely something that makes it simpler. Last thing is don't try to recycle. About a year and a half ago, we had a client who was happy with their desktop site, but they decided that they wanted to make it responsive as well. And I was a developer on the project, and I thought, oh, this will be simple. They've already got the desktop site. I'll just recycle my code. I'll make a mobile site that is responsive, and I'll be done, and it'll be easy. It's incredibly difficult to take either a design or a coded out developed site and make it responsive because it's like the opposite of going mobile first. You're taking a site that's designed for desktop and then trying to compress it and tear it down and build it into a mobile site. By the time I actually got done, it probably would have been much quicker if I had just, taken the design, thrown it out, and started from scratch. Tearing down is extremely difficult. So mobile first, don't try to recycle existing code. I'm going to just walk us through sites that we've done at IdeaDen. It's Brad Paisley's site. If you want to follow along on your tablet or your phone or whatnot, it's bradpaisley.com. Give me 1 second because I've got to turn off the screen mirroring so I can see what I'm looking at here. All right. Okay, we're going to be looking at the local version that's running on my computer, but it should be very similar unless we've done a push in the last couple days to what's on bradpaisley.com. The code is definitely the same. So this is Brad's site. If you look at it on a mobile phone, it will definitely look quite different from what you see on the desktop. If you have a Mac, it has an iOS simulator built in, so you can actually look at the site through their simulator. So no, I do not want to install this web app. Thank you. So this is the mobile site, and obviously it's same content, but it's shrunk down compared to what's on the desktop site. But completely same code set. The only difference is what responsive CSS is doing. And to me, I think that's just insanely cool. Music page, this is where you can look at, you know, every album that he's had that's come out. You can open up a tab over here on the side, listen to a sample of Southern Comfort Zone. This doesn't use Slash, obviously, because we're targeting desktop sites and tablets and phones as well. Now, if I go, I'll go over to the track info page. Okay, this is a pretty basic page, and it's a good example of how you would go from a mobile version to a desktop version. So Southern Comfort Zone, every song basically has this page. On the left column, we've got a description about what the song is, the lyrics, and then on the right, we've got the albums it's on, art, video, and everything. But basically, it's, you know, it's 50% over here. So these two divs, it's 50%, 50%, and we have a container div that is something around about 1,000 pixels. So if I take my Chrome window and I shrink this down, we've now shrunk a layout size down. See how that snaps down? Same div width, they're both still 50% wide, but the only change in the CSS is the width for the container div has gone from 1,000 to, I don't know, say 800. If I keep shrinking it down, now we're to a narrow layout where we've shrunk that container div again, but because we don't want to compress, you know, the content, like we don't want to keep shrinking these columns down, 50% of, you know, 10 pixels is unreadable. So on the narrow layout, the only change that we've made is now these two column divs now have a width of 100%. So three completely different, you know, layouts basically, and it's only 6 different lines of code. Just changing, you know, the width of the container div and then using percentages for the interior 2 div columns. And then if I keep shrinking down, now we've gone to the mobile phone version. So, you know, the menu is here instead of being across the top of the screen, but the content is the same. Those divs still have a width of 100%. So that's kind of how you have to approach coding out a responsive site, is to try to look at the site holistically and try to use, you know, a larger element like a container div to adjust your content for different sites. Now, if you go to, say, Smashing Magazine or you know, one of these design blogs, some people would say responsive sites, they have to always, basically no matter what your browser window size is, they should fill it. Like, and this is what some people would call an adaptive site, because as I resize this window, there's not a lot of content changing. The background is set to cover, but beyond that, the container is the same. So some people would say this is adaptive because there's different breakpoints, but at the end of the day, that's just kind of arguing semantics. So if you hear somebody say it's an adaptive site or a responsive site, you're getting down into the nitty-gritty, but this is basically what responsive looks like as you resize a browser. No matter what width I am, it accommodates whatever my browser is. And it looks like the projected, there's another even wider view of this if you have like an Apple Cinema display where this content stretches even wider that I can't show here, but that's basically kind of the gist of a responsive site. I'm changing a lot of content here and I'm only using, you know, say 6, 7 lines of code for each different breakpoint. I'm going to go into the code now and show you what that looks like. Crap, that's a little small. Okay, well, I'll try to talk you guys through it. This is the CSS directory, and what we have here, there's 5 different CSS documents. I know it's hard to see, but you've got global.css, narrow.css, normal.css, wide.css, and default. And the way that I think is, to me, the best way to go about doing a responsive site is like this. Global.css is everything that you want on every single version of your site. So if you're looking at a mobile phone or if you're looking at an Apple Cinema display, there's certain things that I want on all versions of my site. So say like the custom fonts we're importing or Brad's logo. That all goes into global.css. Then we have these 4 files up at the top: default, narrow, normal, and wide. Those are my desktop versions. If you're on a mobile phone, obviously, at least for this site, you're not getting, the backgrounds or the fancy, navigation at the top and a lot of the imagery. For anything that goes into the desktop versions of the site, that goes into default.css. And then narrow, normal, and wide, they're pretty small files. They're the customizations that I need to make the site fit. So if I need to change the font just on narrow, I drop it in there. If I need to change, the padding on normal, that's in there. And the way that this works in terms of CSS is they all pile on top of each other. So everything in global is seen on every single page. Default is seen on all the desktop pages. Narrow is seen on all the desktop pages, which is just narrow. And then normal comes in after that, but it still loads in what is in narrow. So the idea is by the time you get down to the wide version, you really, hopefully, don't have to write that much. And that helps keep your CSS organized rather than just kind of organizing it by page. I used to do that, thinking that it made things easier. And this is before I was using a preprocessor. And this all compiles in Drupal to be one minified document. But at least in my experience, I found this is the best way to go about it. At least it makes sense in my mind. If it's the whole site goes in global, and then depending on what I'm trying to target on the desktop, it goes either the default or narrow, normal, and wide. One other thing to keep in mind when you're building out a responsive site is iPads, iPhones, most Androids now, they need Retina images. And building that into a desktop site can be a little more challenging because for a desktop site, also on an iPad, there's a lot of stuff to worry about here. I would definitely recommend not to skip that step. It's simple to just say, oh, I'm not going to worry about Retina images, but it's something that needs to be tackled in the design phase, because if the PSD isn't designed for 2x Retina images, it's not going to help. But the easiest way for me that I found with putting responsive images in is a lot of these, like that's a background image, the Brad Paisley logo up there is a background image, is if you export those as 2 times the size you need there and put it into your CSS with the background size property, you don't have to worry about using JavaScript or anything to insert in a second logo at 2x. It takes care of itself automatically. And then depending on how far back you want to support with Internet Explorer, these are not images, this is an icon font. And if you're using a font, it's going to be Retina no matter what because it's from a font. Down the road, I think we'll probably end up converting all these to SVG as we phase out older versions of IE. But for Brad's site, we have to support IE8. And that can be problematic sometimes because it's IE. Let me go back to the slides. Yeah.
Do you ever do anything for response time in terms of the download time of the images? Like, you think that comes naturally with that, but is there a way to specify on the mobile side, you don't necessarily want to background?
There is. If you put them, it's something that has to be done more on the back end, because if it's in the CSS document, it's going to load it in. Loading time is definitely something to pay attention to. The best way is just to, at least what I found, is highly optimize your images, use them sparingly, pin crush anything you can, and you can shrink images down enough that it's not horrible. But worst case, yeah, specify load them only for mobile. But again, that kind of is, you're sort of building another site. So you don't want to, because then you're kind of going down that road, and it's a matter of semantics, but you're making more work for yourself down the road. So in a perfect world, you can fit it back in. Okay. All right. So what I was just doing when I was walking you guys through that site, I was resizing it on my Chrome browser. I could see the mobile design, I could see the narrow design, the wide, all that stuff. Cross browser is now cross device testing. So you not only do you have to test in all the different browsers, you have to test in all the different widths potentially that those browsers could be in. Plus iPads, iPhones, all the Android phones. Don't skip this step. Even if it looks right on your Chrome browser, test on real devices as much as possible. If there's one thing that I should hammer home in this, it is to get your friend's, Motorola Droid, get the iPhone 4S, get somebody's old tablet. There's been so many times back when I was starting responsive work that I thought I had cross-browser tested just by resizing the window. And then, our client opens up their site in like an iPhone 3G, and it looks like crap. And then the call comes back to me, and I'm like, well, it looks fine on when I tested it. It doesn't take very long. Get a list of who in the office has what. You can pick up phones for cheap on eBay. Test on real devices as much as possible. You won't hit everything, but you will find stuff that simulators miss. Yeah.
I was going to ask, kind of on the simulator or unit test suite that has like a really good cross-device testing schema, so that simulate the Motorola device.
Yeah. No, I have not. Which is, if anybody knows of anything, I'm all ears. I know that if you're using a Mac, you can use the iOS simulator and test Safari. But I'm almost to the point now where I've been burned by this probably 2 or 3 times. I almost don't trust simulators. I mean, I would use them if it was there, but I wouldn't feel completely comfortable until I saw it on what I felt like was a wide range of devices. Again, that's one of the important things about analytics. You can go back and you can look at what are the main devices that are hitting me and try to test on those. Some people are comfortable just doing simulators. I'm not. So, yeah. One downside that I've found with browser stacker, these simulators in general, is I can't open up a console and play with the CSS. If you're using an iPad, you can plug it into your computer and you can use Safari to open up DevTools on there and actively change what you see on the iPad screen. If you have a Google tablet, you can plug it into your computer. You can change in Google DevTools on your desktop what you see on your Samsung Galaxy Tab or your Motorola Zoom. But it's kind of, to me, it's like, if I open it up in a simulator or even a real device like I'm testing on an old iPad, it's frustrating to see a problem and then I have to go back to my desktop, push the code up, check it. So, I mean, this is definitely, it can be difficult at times, but use real devices as much as you can. And this is something that you need to do. And while we're talking about that, I alluded to it a second ago. There's an elephant in the room, and that would be this. If you need to support legacy IE and you want to build a responsive site, bless you. It's definitely challenging. Anything that's IE8 or earlier, they completely ignore media queries. So for Brad Paisley's site, if we didn't have IE8 specific style sheets, when you load the page, all it would see is the mobile design. And IE8, even on a huge desktop, it would get the mobile layout because that's the first CSS that we present, and then use media queries to load in our desktop on top of that. So for me, I would say if you have a client that wants a responsive site, and then they also say, oh, you need to support IE6, steer them away from responsive because you're creating 2 enormous headaches for yourself. Trying to balance a responsive site with IE, I've never gone all the way back to 6. I don't ever want to go all the way back to 6. And one other thing I want to throw into this, so this isn't so much a responsive thing as it is just a really good practice. About 2.5 years ago, I was doing a site that was a big WordPress site, and it was supposed to be an internal news portal for a client that I don't want to name or throw under the bus. But it was only for them, only for their internal use. It was a big organization, and they wanted to post calendar, news updates, and stuff like that on there. So we built out these comps. We built their site for them. We were probably 3 days away from handing them the code, giving them the keys. Everybody's all happy. We found out that everybody in the organization used IE7, and none of us thought to ask, how far back in IE do you need to know to go when you code on a site? So now, from now on, whenever I start a new project, one of the first things I ask the PM, ask the client is, how far back in IE do you need? And if you don't know, tell me before we do anything. Because because there's nothing that's more frustrating than having a site and then finding out in the 11th hour, oh yeah, we've got to support IE7. So I would say if you need to support IE and you want to go responsive, tread lightly. The only way to support IE8 and lower in a responsive site is to have a completely separate set of style sheets because it doesn't handle media queries at all. So IE9 and up, you're okay. Anything 8 and below, you can't do SVGs either in 8 and below. So it's not a good thing. Luckily, depending on who, the clients could have a different opinion, but Microsoft now, Windows XP is gone, so theoretically IE8 should be gone too. Hopefully you'll need to upgrade. Yeah, I know. Eventually we'll get there, but yeah, good old IE. So takeaways from this. The first would be, once you build it, responsive sites are easier to maintain because it's only one code base and you're not having, if a client comes in and has changed something, you only need to change it once. Building it out can be tough. Second is mobile first design, mobile first development. Design your mobile site first, develop your mobile site first. Tearing down is much harder than building up. Third, use real devices as much as possible when you're testing. We've talked about it, but I don't trust simulators. I've been burned by them enough that I'll be happy to look at them. They make me feel better about the site, but I don't feel truly comfortable until I've actually seen it on an iPad 2 or on a Motorola Zoom. And then last, I would say pick one, responsive or legacy IE, but never both unless you're a masochist. So yeah, hopefully, if there's one more reason you can convince people to get off IE. Funny story, I'm a front-end developer. I've been doing this for, well, almost 10 years now. My parents obviously want to know what their son's doing. Hey, show us what you built. My dad still uses IE6. He still uses Windows XP. And he always is asking me to show him what I've built. And I'm like, I can't send it to you because your computer doesn't support it. And his response is, why do I need to upgrade my browser? It's the same internet. So I feel like I failed as a son, that I haven't convinced my dad to upgrade off of Windows XP. Eventually I'll get him there because eventually his computer will die and I'll have to upgrade. I'll have to go to Windows 8 and find the new start menu in Metro and it'll blow his mind. But, something. But I think it's always kind of funny to me that I'm always angry about people that use older versions of IE and they make my job a lot harder as a front-end developer. But my dad still uses an old version of IE, so maybe I should change my opinion. If you want to contact me, that's all my contact info. I have a pretty unique name, so type in Colin Lord, you'll probably find me. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. All right. Yeah. If you have a responsive site, you're going to be building a lot more content. You're essentially loading in CSS for multiple variations of the site. That's one of the reasons why when you go mobile development, mobile first, you build up on top of that because that's way less lines of code than if you start at a desktop and then tore down. Because if you go mobile and then you add in your desktop styles, you're adding them in. But if you write your desktop and then you do your mobile, you're overriding all those styles you don't need. So you're writing, background transparent with, much smaller. So that's one of the best ways to mitigate big code load and to load the site faster is to go mobile first development. Images, there's only so much you can do. I always try to pin crush my images as much as I can, JPEG optimize, and basically anything I can do to shrink them down. Basically, I sit there with image optimizer on my laptop, and I make it as low as I can go before the designer starts to feel uncomfortable and see his site starts to break down. Your site's going to be bigger, especially for the sites that we do, like Brad Paisley's site. There's graphics all over the place. Sort of a judgment call. Most people now have 4G phones, so the site will load faster, but it is what it is. It's a bigger site. So I would recommend speed testing your page, making sure you're not downloading like 12 megs of data, but it's going to be more than the standard desktop site. Yeah. Right, and on top of that, display none is not good for SEO. So some people, whenever I see a responsive site, my first thing to do is view source it because I'm a dork and I want to see how they did it and if they had something better than me. I've seen responsive sites where they build out the mobile version and they have like a wrapper on it. It's like div ID mobile. And if you're on the desktop, it just display none's that. But it's not a good way because you've really built the site twice and it's on one page. I mean, try to use display none as much as possible if for no other reason than you're loading the stuff, it's just not showing. And then Google, if they see 9 display nones on the page, they're going to think you're trying to SEO and all that bad SEO practices. You'll get flagged by them, and then your page will load slowly on top of it. So definitely display none is use it lightly. So, I think they're good for if you just need to spin up a site quickly. I built something a couple of weeks ago for a friend. He just wanted like a basic site for his email and everything, and to put his Twitter profile and stuff. Bootstrap's fine for that. It certainly works, and people have built some really great sites using Bootstrap. They have them all over the internet. Nothing against it. We don't use Bootstrap, but that doesn't mean I think it's bad. I definitely think using a grid system is good. You're going to be writing so much CSS anyway that the 100 lines or whatever that they've got isn't that big a deal. I like it. I don't personally use it every day, but I don't have any reason that I don't like it. Yeah.
So the top design is really based on Windows browser, correct?
Yes.
So I guess a lot of mobile websites will integrate and decide how to redirect. Would you ever consider doing bandwidth management based on user agent versus that way?
You could. It really comes down to the specific client, the specific site, the specific page, and the content. It's one of those things like, as a front-end developer, I know that building out a site with tables and spacer gifts is evil. I shouldn't do that. There's no scenario where doing that as layout is good. With responsive, it's not so black and white. Depending on what your content is, but depending on who you're serving the site to, different approaches for different things. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I'd say it all depends on, who your client is and who your people are, what people are coming to your site. I haven't, but I'm sure somebody has somewhere. Yeah. Where? So I'm actually not as familiar with that part of staff because I haven't used it in probably 6 months. I think you're right, but I don't want to say yes without actually knowing for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think it really comes down to personal developer preference because if you're being good and you're being smart, you're metafying it and smashing it down anyway. How you organize your stuff is really important, especially with multiple people coding out your site. Like there's 3 of us at IdeaDen that write CSS, and we really harp on each other. Like, make sure everything you write goes where it should, because it's incredibly easy with a responsive site. If you aren't organized, to do a bunch of work and look good on your desktop, and then it completely screws up your phone or iPad or something like that. So being really organized really helps that because then you can sort of seize your editing. Okay, this is for desktop, this is for everybody, this is just for mobile. So no matter what you use, if it's SaaS, less, just what we use, which is through Drupal, I think organization of your CSS is one of the most important things you can do, especially for the team environment where you have multiple front-end developers or whoever editing the same code, because you can really get lost in all your media queries. Yeah. Oh. One of y'all can go first.
I was curious, it's kind of backtrack. Earlier you talked about how Google will name you.
Yeah.
What is their reasoning?
They started actually doing this. type in, New York Times net neutrality, April 20th, 2014. So that article comes up as my first result. Some people respond over mobile and desktop sites. They have it set so no matter what interior page you go to, it will redirect you to the mobile homepage because the mobile site doesn't have everything that the desktop site has. Like most of the time when I end up on a mobile site, my first reaction is, oh crap, they don't have everything I need there. And I'm scrolling to the bottom to find the full site so I can actually find what I need to get to. And, it's going to annoy you if you're trying to find an article, you find it, and then because you're on a mobile phone, it's sent you to the homepage, which is worthless because the article was a month ago. So I think Google's reasoning for wanting to do that is just to preserve a better user experience because it's coming out of Google's search engine. So, they might be thinking that the end user is going to think, well, Google sucks because they didn't send me the page they told me I was going to go to. So I'd say it's that, and then Google's just making sure that, they're being kind. If you're going to be a lazy developer, they don't want to have you hired as somebody who's taking the time to build a responsive site or do more work than you.
Yeah, after the I'm just thinking, I just went to my bank account the other day.
Yeah.
And bankamerica.com.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of secure networks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of redirects and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to, I don't know what that practice was, but my tendency is to time.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is it's a very simple way. They're recycling their code. They're building a mobile site, but they don't want to have to go through the work of redirecting you if you're on a mobile device and you're coming in, through a back door in their mind. It's a fast way to get it up. It's not the right way to get it up. One other thing worth throwing out that I just thought of is, depending on who your client is, you might be thinking, why do I want to go through the work of building a responsive site when I could just build a native iOS app and a native Android app? And again, I think that goes down more to, who your client is. Like if I'm working for the Weather Channel, basically everybody has, a weather app already on their phone. They get a ton of people through their mobile app because people are thinking, oh, I want to download the Weather Channel's app because I want to go there, check the radar 8 times a day. But for, Brad Paisley, not as many people are going to think, I want to go download the Brad Paisley app and clutter up a folder on my phone. So for us, building a mobile responsive site is better, but I would say for some people like, say, the Weather Channel or the New York Times or, somebody like that, maybe you'd be better off just having a desktop site and then building an iOS app and an Android app. Again, it goes down to how much time you have, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. Yeah.
Have you ever taken one of your apps or one of your websites and rather than a mobile app that just to the web view to display all the content?
We have not, but Justin Moore is one of our clients, and we just hired somebody who's a iOS developer, and we actually have built out a Justin Moore app. I think it's public in the App Store now. You can download it. It's a good thought. There's something, you put yourself in the App Store too. I think it comes down to who your client is, because weather apps, news apps, music apps, people are going to look at them different ways. You had a question? Right. Yeah, try to avoid that. The thing that I found with the responsive sites that I've done is it always comes down to how much time do I have. There's always a way to, add in one extra thing, make it better. If I had an extra week, I would, make, this an icon font instead of just being, 2 images. But Retina images, I think are important, especially because people are almost coming to expect them now. Like I have an iPad Air and an iPhone 5, and if I see something that isn't Retina, I kind of like, oh, that's crap. Why didn't they go through and do that? Luckily, with media queries, you can specify, if it's, the width of the phone is 320 to 480, I think that's a phone. You can also say if it's a Retina-based phone, load in these different styles. So it's not hard to support Retina images. It's just another thing you can target with media queries.
flash with, like the ASCII flashes?
Yeah.
How would you use it?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head because I haven't saved on a text document. Yeah, that's what it is. Right. So it's like if you're on a mobile phone and your Retina, load this. If you're not, load, you know, the other style. All right. Anything else? Sweet. Well, that's everything I've got, guys.